Okay, we're back to talk about where are we? We're in Jerusalem, and right? We're in Jerusalem, right? That's where we are in our class. We're not in Jerusalem literally, but we're talking about Jerusalem. Okay, let's just go over this story a little bit again, and then we'll read the scriptures. You can turn to Matthew 24 as I read this story. This comes from a Christian historian, the story of James the Just. He was, the people controlling the temple saw that people were following Jesus. Even scribes and some members of the Pharisees' families were starting to worship Jesus. And they were trying to reason with James. They said, James, tell the Jews that, this shows you the sort of the way the devil's confusion had worked to sort of try and quiet the Christian witness that was going on in this part of the world at this time. Because the Pharisees, they said, they called him the righteous one. James became known righteous one. We place great confidence in you. And the people are led astray after Jesus, the crucified one. So please declare to us, what is this way, Jesus? And they put James on the pinnacle of the temple. And his words went like this: Why do you ask me about Jesus, the Son of Man? He sits in heaven at the right hand of power, and he will come soon in the clouds of heaven. And the Pharisees were horrified. The people were not. They began shouting, Hosanna to the Son of David. The Pharisees climbed the temple and pushed James down. That fall did not kill him. And he rose to his knees and began to pray. And he said, I beg of you, Lord God, our Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Same prayer that Jesus prayed, same prayer that Stephen prayed. The Pharisees began to stone him. A priest. Now there's this group of people called Rechabites. All right? Rechabites. They're mentioned in Jeremiah as a family that lived in tents and would not drink wine because their father instructed them not to. Rechabites. And a Rechabite tried to get in between the stones and save James from being killed. One of the priests, the son of the Rechabites. And that's a prophecy, by the way, in Jeremiah. Jeremiah was told to tell the Rechabites because they listened to their father's words and practiced what he preached, they would not suffer. They would always have somebody standing before the Lord. So here it is. This is 62 A.D. The temple will be destroyed in 8 years, and the Rechabites still have somebody in the temple standing before the Lord. And this man's trying to save. Stop. The righteous one is praying. But then, like I told you, this laundry man came and dashed his brains out. Sorry. It's kind of funny, isn't it? I guess but I mean it's kind of interesting. But a fuller took out of his club and he hit James in the head. Took him out. That was the end of that. Okay. All right, let's go to the scriptures. Matthew 24. And he's sitting on the Mount of Olives in verse 3 of Matthew 24. Disciples very interested in what's going to happen. He said at the beginning of this chapter, let's start there. We'll start verse 1. Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to him to show him the buildings. And Jesus said to them, Do you not see all these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? And Jesus said, Take heed that no one deceives you. And this is his discourse. This has a name, Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24. He's talking about the end times. It's on the Mount of Olives, Olivet Discourse. And Jesus speaks, and this is, the Christians in Jerusalem have this in their mind. They have this in their heart. This is mentioned also in Mark 13 and also in Luke 19 and 21. In Luke 19, we see the heart of Jesus as he came over the hill to verse 41. As Jesus drew near, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, if you had known, even you, speaking to the people of Jerusalem, especially in this your day, the things that make for you your peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. For days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment, a siege around you, surround you, close in on you on every side, level you and your children within you to the ground. And they will not leave in you one stone upon another, because you did not know the time of your visitation. So Jesus came over the hill, he wept over the city, and this is what he was seeing. He was seeing this time. This is 30 A.D., 40 years later, a generation later, Jerusalem would be no more. It would be leveled to the ground, as Jesus said. So he made this prophecy, and so this was in their hearts. James' death started an exodus, a Christian exodus from Rome. Okay? So the Christians are leaving. Christians leave Jerusalem, and they set themselves up in another place. Now, this is wrong thing. This is Timothy in Ephesus. Timothy is being martyred about this same time, but in here, this is James. This is a statue of James. That's the kind of thing that hit him on the head there. See that little thing? I don't know why they have it in his hand. That's a statue of him, but he was hit over the head with one of those. I guess he carried it up with heaven with him, maybe. I don't know, but that's James the Just. So the Christians began to leave. They moved into this area over here called Pella, right there. This is where they were. And from 62 to 66, just about every believer, because of what Jesus had said. Let's read it. Where does it say this? Let's see. Where is it? Let's see. Anyway, he's telling them to. I got to find it here now. Flee to the mountains. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Verse 16. Matthew 24. Matthew 24:16. Jesus says to them, therefore, when you see the abomination of the desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads it, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So, okay, this is not the abomination of the desolation. That's a thing that the Antichrist will do when he enters into the temple and proclaims himself as the one God of the world who should be worshipped. So this is really they're not so deceived, but this isn't But they hear this when they hear that James is dead, and they see and they hear, and Rome is starting. What James's death was a pretext for the Romans to start, closing in on Jerusalem. It was like these kind of things kept happening, and they unruly. When unruly things happened, they wanted to put order back in place. But the Christians, they left Jerusalem here and moved over here to this area the Christians that could get out of the city. And so Jerusalem really was without a Christian influence in these last days before its destruction. So the killing of James set off really the big revolt. It was the thing that really set off the big revolt, and it brought the Roman legions to the doors. Okay? So now the thing, let's go back to this. Okay. The Jews themselves were having their own troubles. The Jews themselves were divided. So the Christian witness is gone from Jerusalem, and now inside of Jerusalem you have a couple of elements. You have your radicals who just want to fight Rome to the death. They're ready to go down. And then you had the priests and the governments, the Sanhedrin, the council of Jerusalem, who loved their place and were just trying to keep control of the city so that they could keep their place in the temple and keep their business going with the sacrifices. The temple we know from Jesus. That's what after he says this, right? After Jesus talks about these things, he went down and back in Luke 19. The first thing he did after saying that was he went down. Let's see, back in Luke 19. They didn't know the time of their visitation, verse 44. Verse 45, then he went into the temple and began to drive out those who bought and sold in it, saying to them, it's written, my house shall be a house of prayer, you've made it a den of thieves. And he was daily teaching in the temple, but the chief priests, scribes, and the leaders of the people sought to destroy him, and they were unable to do anything, for all the people were very attentive to hear him. So in the temple was the family business of the temple with the family of Annas and Caiaphas at Jesus' day. This was continuing into this next generation. It was still going on. The temple business, very profitable. Lots of sacrifices. People still came to the temple for all the festivals. The festival of booths, the festival of Passover, the Day of Atonement. They all came to Jerusalem. All these people from around the Roman Empire would travel to Jerusalem, buy their sacrifices when they got there. So the temple business was something, the love of money is the root of all evil, and that's the root of their confederation with Rome. The love of money and the temple business they were not willing to lose. But now James is dead and the Christians have fled. They've fled across the river. They've gone across the river. It's very interesting. There you see Jericho. It's very close to where Joshua led them in. When you go through and you see these things in the Bible, you find wow, okay, they came in there and then they went out there. It's like the witness, the people of God, the witness of God is out of the picture right now. So now I talked about this Caligula, the mental case emperor. One of the things he did was have a gold statue of himself made, and he was sending it to be set up in the temple at Jerusalem. And so that just stirred up all of the radicals. So that was sort of the seeds of the rebellion that started probably around 4750 A.D. and then had its culmination in that massacre in Galilee with Josephus escaping it. That was 40,000 people died. And so these seeds are still there. People still want their country back, but the priests still want their business. And so you have these competing interests going on. And the death of James and the riot that ensued after it, it was just the one thing that the Roman army needed to descend on Jerusalem. And so they began to creep closer. The next thing that happened was one of the procurator, not the procreator, sorry, the procurator, which is the person who was responsible for enforcing the law in Jerusalem. he stole silver. He stole silver from the temple. Okay? So now you got the priests upset, the high priest family and their business, stole silver from the temple. And this is, his name was Florus. This happened in 66. And so this happened in 66. And, there was an outraged riot there. And the riot was so out of control that legions had to be called in from Syria. They had to call in legions from Syria. Let's go back to this up here. This is Damascus. So they had to send Roman legions from these cities to help put down, the rebellion that was going, the riots that were going on in Jerusalem. So that, now you have the soldiers in position to do the next thing that they're going to do. The thing is that the people in Jerusalem had become well armed, and many soldiers were being killed, and this was not sitting well with the Roman people. They were going to take care of this. And on the outside, let's see, what do we got next here? Okay, here you see. On the outside, this is going to happen. This siege wall is going to go all around the city. Okay, and this is going to mean that nothing can get in or nothing can get out. So they can't trade, they can't get any food. There's nothing coming in, nothing can come in from the fields, and no one can go out of the city. The believers have left. The believers in Christ have left. And here's, this was the problem. These are the legions. You see the Roman legions around there, and they built this way around the city to get ready to destroy it. So on the outside, you had the outside. On the outside of this, you have the Romans. On the inside, you've got Jews who had begun to think about survival mode. Okay, and so over the years, from about 60, they had learned something from Joseph, and they had Joseph back in Egypt. They had stockpiled food. They had stockpiled probably enough food to last a 5-year siege. That's a lot of food. They had stockpiled it in certain places in the city. But the Jewish people were divided. The radical people who wanted to fight the Romans once and for all, they had a couple of small victories. See, that's the thing. They had a couple of small victories where they defeated a Roman legion. They surprised them, they defeated them, and they drove them back. And then the thing that happened after stealing the silver, when they saw that they had to invite other troops, and they thought God was with them. They said, God is going to be with us, and we are going to have the city, and we're going to get our land back. And there was some hardcore nationalists, hardcore people in the midst of Jerusalem who found all of the stocks of supplies, and they burned it. They burned the food. They burned the food because they wanted everyone to be in on the fight. They figured if there were stockpiles of food, then people would just be lazy during the siege and that they would not fight the Romans. So you had this group of Jewish radicals who burned all the stockpiles of food. They could have lasted 5 years in this siege. But this siege went up about I think the final phase of this siege lasted from May until, I got it right here. It lasted from May until September. May until September. 60,000 heavily armed, highly professional troops began building, the engines of war around this, battering rams and everything. Remember, Jerusalem has walls around it. Nehemiah built them, and the walls are around there. It's a fortress kind of city, really. But they had this stockpile of dry food was gone. The security blanket. The zealots did not think this was wise. They said people aren't going to fight if they're eating all the time. And in the summer of 70 A.D., the Romans breached these walls. 70 A.D., 70 D.A., there you go, district attorney. 70 A.D., the Romans breached the walls. and began just after the Passover in 70 AD. Just after the Passover. Now you think about that. If Jesus died in 30 AD, 40 Passovers later, now Jesus' words are going to come true. He arrived in Jerusalem at the Passover about 30 AD, 70 AD, just after the Passover, the siege went up, and they began coming into the city. Let's see. Okay. So they began. Titus was leading this. Titus, who would become the emperor in 79, is leading this attack. He leads the fight. And they get inside the city, and it isn't pretty. This is just a couple of the renditions of it here. That is the temple. You see there. That's one. Oh, sorry. It's one thing they did. They started carrying the sacred things out of the temple. There's one of those things that's going out of there, and they're throwing zealots out of here. Like people wanted to die in the fire. They set fire to the temple. And now this is the Roman. You can see the sense of the size of the Roman that had surrounded Jerusalem. You see that? This is one of the engines of war that they used. They built these things to get over the walls, and you can see how they're once they break through this wall, what's happening? They're all going in there, and it's hand-to-hand, street-to-street combat, And pardon me? Him and his father believed in fires. Yeah, they believed in fires. They set the fires in there. Let's see. Okay. So they made a breach in the wall, and they killed a number of people. Obviously they were crucifying. They found every tree that they could find in the nearby area and brought it into the city. And what they didn't use for fires, they used for crosses. They were crucifying 500 people a day. They were crucifying 500 people a day, and they were facing them towards the city. Okay, so if you go back to this, like you can see, if you're looking over the wall, you had people crucified all around the city every day. So if you looked over the wall, you saw dead people on the cross, and you're not getting any food coming in. So that's what's happening to Jerusalem at that time. And here's another picture of the kind of fire that they were bringing into it. Titus worked his way through the city, and the final place. You remember the picture of what was. It took 46 years to build that temple. It was also the Fortress Antonia, which was the place where Herod lived himself. And so it was sort of attached to the temple because he considered himself king of the Jews. Remember, Herod did. And the Herods are gone at this point, but this massive thing that they built is still there. They worked their way close to it. And this is the climax of the whole thing. This is a rendering of Titus stepping over the body of one of the priests there and going into the Holy of Holies. He's going into the Holy of Holies there. And the historian at the time said, he wrote it this way: Titus went into God's place and found it empty. He went into God's place and found it empty. It's like they went into the Holy of Holies, and there was nothing there. It was empty. The presence of God obviously was gone because the believers were out of the city. They had given themselves over to Caesar at the trial of Jesus before Pilate, and this was the end result. Jesus said not one stone would be left, and that's what happened. They set fire they set fire to the temple, and the amount of heat that it generated just started melting the gold that Herod had put on it, and the stones began to pop, and it became just one big pile of rubble. And so every Jew that they could find alive was enslaved to carry out all of the precious things that were in the temple at that point. So this is the aftermath of this. This is Titus's arch that still stands in Rome, and this was built with Jewish slave labor. Jewish slave labor was used to build this. This is how Josephus described the destruction of the temple. While the holy house was on fire, everything was plundered that came to hand, and 10,000 of those who were caught were slain. There were 10,000 people holed up in the temple, and they were slain at once. 6,000 were in this one area, and the soldiers just set them on fire. There was no commiseration of any age. Children, old men, priests were all slain in the same manner. The flame was also carried a long way. It made an echo together with the groans of those who were slain. One would have thought the whole city would have been on fire. Nor can one imagine anything greater or more terrible than this noise. That's the falling of the temple. Falling of the temple. It starts to fall apart. The destruction of the second temple obviously is it's a critical thing in the lives of the Jews, because they don't make the sacrifice. This was the place where they offered their sacrifices. And so they don't have this place. They are waiting for the next temple to be built, but there's a problem. There's a mosque on top of the site right now. And so, that's what they're looking towards, that day when they will be able to rebuild the temple again and reinstitute their sacrifices, because it is in the Old Testament that they will have that moment. So, in the Jewish writings, they say, why was the second temple destroyed? They say not because of Rome, but because of the senseless hatred of one Jew for another. And they removed all the things of value, and that's the one thing they did there. Titus had this built for himself, and then the other thing, this is on this actual. This is on the very this sculpture is on the very arch that's in Rome, and it shows what was going on, how they're carrying out the plunder. They're plundering the temple, taking out the golden things, and just before they flattened it all, they wanted to get everything valuable out of that. Now, there was a group of 1,000 zealots, and they made their, this is another thing. This is the first man-made tunnel. Jewish slaves built that for Titus. He wanted a tunnel to help with floodwaters. He wanted to divert floodwaters. If there was a flood in Rome. If there was any flood, they wanted to divert the floodwaters away. I think this is closer to Antioch. So they wanted to divert the floodwaters away from the city, so they had the Jewish slaves build this tunnel there. This is the aftermath of their thing. Let's see where we thought we had. Sorry, got lost. I got lost. All the guys there. There's the baths. Isn't that funny? There's you go. I had a picture of the baths in there all along. That's the Apostle Paul. Anyway, okay. I was looking for one particular image. Let's see if I can find it. It's this place called Masada that they still a place called Masada. It's a large place where a group of zealots went to run, and that was the final battle. Titus eventually. The Jews still consider that the rallying cry. Masada will never fall again. That was the last place that they held in Judea. When they finally got them all out of Judea, when they finally got them all out of this place, it was one of Herod's summer. It was on top of a high rock. It was a safe place. Herod would go there to get away from people making trouble for him or just to have a getaway. And a group of Jews, 1,000 of them, wound up being up there, and they also committed suicide, killed each other. And when the Romans built a large ramp to get to the top there, and when they got in, everyone was dead. It was sort of like a very empty victory for them. They didn't get to pillage or rape anybody. And they got up there and everyone was dead. So, and that's what Israel says that even today, Masada shall never fall again. It's like a rallying cry for the nation of Israel. Okay, so that happened in, pardon me? Okay, it is very wild. Okay. It's interesting. Let's just talk about a couple of things related to this. Okay. Over the course of history, just talk about this city. Over the course of history, there have been 27 sieges of Jerusalem. 27 sieges for the city itself. And the first one began with King David, the tribe of Judah. Before that, the tribe of Judah against the Jebusites in 1443 BC. But that was the first one, and David got it. And so 27 sieges of Jerusalem. The other interesting thing now this is written about, this is directly connected to the temple, itself. So Jerusalem is a city that's really been, constantly warred over, constant warfare at this place. But the one thing that's in the Talmuds, there's two Talmuds, Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud. This is the commentary on the books of Moses and the commentary really on the life of the Jewish nation, the Talmuds. And both of these have this interesting stories about the Jerusalem temple, okay? And these stories start in 30, okay? What happened in 30? Jesus went to the cross, right? Okay. Now, in the Jerusalem Talmud and in the Babylonian Talmud, these two collections of writings by Jewish wise men, rabbis who study the scriptures and report on Jewish life, they have this story that for 40 years, from 30 to 70, things happened at the temple that had never happened before. Okay, things happened at the temple. Okay. Now in the Old Testament, you have goats, right? There's this one offering that's the scapegoat offering. One goat dies, and one goat everyone puts their hands on, and he's sent away by the hand of a strong man into the wilderness, into a desert place. It's signifying the sacrifice and your sins being sent away. Okay? So every year, 2 goats are brought to the temple for this sacrifice. Every year. And 1 goat is put on the left, and 1 goat is put on the right. For 40 years, and they would reach into a bag that had a black stone and a white stone, and one would represent the left and one would represent the right. For 40 years, they picked the same stone, and the left goat went to its death every year. 40 years. It had never happened that way before. But this is in the Jewish writing. This isn't a Christian account of what we think happened. This is in the Talmuds. They say that for 40 years, the glot on the goat would be the left. It would be the left for 40 years. The chances of that happening are 2 to the 40th power. 1 in 5 billion. 1 in 5.5 billion chance of that. The lot came up 40 straight times. It came up black. They would reach in, they grab the black stone, which meant the left goat would die for 40 years. Now, the left goat, when he was selected for dying, they would tie a little strip of cloth that was red. It was a crimson cloth. It was a cloth, blood sacrifice. And they would tie that cloth around the goat's horns. And then after it was slain, they would take that cloth, and it was a tradition. It was not something that they were supposed to do by Leviticus or Exodus, but it was a tradition. They would take that cloth and they would nail it to the door of the temple. And most years before that, the cloth would turn white, just from the exposure, but it was also a sign to the Jews that their sacrifice for that year had been accepted. It would turn white during the course. So it was probably a naturally occurring element, like it would just fade because, back then the dyes were made out of, dipped and stuff like that, and the rain would do it. But for 40 years, the cloth stayed red. They'd put it on the temple every year, and it would stay red the whole year. The crimson strip is not mentioned in Scriptures, but for 40 years, the crimson thread, always turned white at some point, but then, now, it did not turn white at all. It didn't turn white. It stayed, it stayed red. It stayed the color. It would not become, white as wool, as the Scripture says in Isaiah 1:18. This is where they developed this tradition. But it never turned white for those 40 years. And that was something that they saw, because if it turned white, they would, they would see that as a sign that the sacrifice for the year was accepted. So the sacrifice for the nation. So you have the lot came up 40 times, and then you have the crimson strip. The crimson cloth stays crimson because that blood of a goat was not going to satisfy or wash away the sins of Israel. Christ had been crucified. So there was no more need for the sacrifice. Okay? That's number 2. The next thing is the temple doors. This went on from 30 A.D. to 70, the temple doors. The east gate. Every night it was like, you're the priest. It's like that's part of it. It's like we have security here, right? They close the sanctuary doors, they lock them up, and they go, wherever. Vince goes home for the night, and the campus shuts down a little bit. They arm the alarms, and that's cool, And unless somebody breaks in, it's 40 years. For 40 years, they closed the doors, locked the gate, and went to bed, and expected them to stay closed. For 40 years, they opened by themselves every night. 40 years in a row, they were. For 40 years. 40 years from 30 until 70 A.D. till the destruction of the temple at Jerusalem, the doors would open. They would swing open every night of their own accord. It began in 30 A.D., and it was a sign of impending doom. This was the leading Jewish authority, Yohanan ben Zakkai. He was a rabbi at the time. He said, this is not a good sign. You see, they had become superstitious. This is what, they had become even superstitious. It wasn't a good sign. It wasn't a good sign. But the lot was, but these things are happening after the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ. These things are happening in the temple. And the fourth thing, the last thing, was the candlestick, the menorah, the candlestick. Now let's see. Do we have that? Let's go. Let's get that. There's, you see the picture there of the candlestick, what it looked like. This large center thing was the important one. And for 40 years, they would light it, and they would do everything they could to feed it with the oil, to feed it with the olive oil. It shouldn't have gone out, but it went out every night. It went out every night for 40 years. No matter how much preparation they made, 12,500 nights in a row, from 30 A.D. to 70 A.D., that lamp went out of its own accord, no matter what provisions were made to keep it lit. It didn't happen. And at the end of those 40 years, those 4 signs at the end of those 40 years, then, the temple was destroyed. The witness, the most precious thing that was in the Jewish heart, that place where they came to worship the Passover, that place where they came to make their sacrifices, that place they came to celebrate those things, it's gone. It's gone. In John, we can read it. These are the Gospel of John 19. Pilate sought, verse 12, or verse 11. Jesus answered Pilate, "You could have no power at all against me unless it was given to you from above. Therefore the one who has delivered me to you has the greater sin." From then on, Pilate sought to release Jesus. But the Jews cried out, saying, "If you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar." When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Jesus out and sat him in judgment, in the judgment seat in the place that's called the Pavement, in the Hebrew Gabbatha. Now it was the preparation day of the Passover, and about the 6th hour, and he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." And they said, away with him, crucify him. "Shall I crucify your king?" Verse 15. "We have no king but Caesar." We have no king but Caesar. So who became their king? Yeah, Vespasian, Nero, Trajan, Titus. Mercy? No. Justice? No. Death? Lots of it. Lots of it. And this is really just, this is the natural outgrowth of like a confederation with a system that is against the holiness of God. And that's really what it is. It is a system of paganism. It is a system of demonic influence. It is a system of self-reliance and self-preservation. And that's what it was. And the Jews gave themselves into it. They saw the person. They heard the person. They saw him open the blind eyes. They heard him speak things. They even ate of multiplied fishes and bread. They ate of his miracles. And yet they said, "We have no king but Caesar." Luke also says like it was the darkness. It talks about the darkness having its day. This is the day of darkness, and darkness had its day. It had its moment. And then Israel later had this amazing moment of defeat. Really, there's nothing else to be, there's nothing else to say. There's no other way to say it. It's just defeat. It's total defeat for them. And they're scattered. And what happened after that? Trajan and they built a temple. They flattened it. Titus and then Domitian, they flattened Jerusalem and they built a temple to Jupiter on it. And they forbid the Jews from living in that place for a season. So, this decision, the chief priests stirred the people and said this. Their loud voice, they stirred up the people to ask for Barabbas and to give up. Their loud voices had their moment, and they asked for Caesar to be their king. God hears his people. When they were in Egypt, they asked to be delivered, and he answered it. And then they always wanted to go back to Egypt. And here, we have no king but Caesar. Okay, Caesar's your king. And we'll see how that goes for your nation. And they're reaping, they've reaped the problems all down through the ages. I like to think that, Jesus Christ, when he's looking out over Jerusalem, he's God and man. So in his heart, he's weeping because he's seeing this. Maybe God is showing him like what's going to come, or he knows already. It's just, he's got a human body, human limitations, but he is God incarnate. And so his broken heart is probably very much because he knows the future that this rejection is going to bring upon Israel. But the good news is that there'll be a day when Jesus Christ returns to the Mount of Olives, riding a white horse with all of the legions of us following him. And it'll be a great day for us. And it will be a bittersweet day for the Jews who will watch it happen. Because it says in that same book, Zechariah, and also in Joel, I think, they will weep for him as weeping for a firstborn son that they've lost. And I'm thinking all the people who are still alive at that time of that race of people, of that, not race, but of that nationality, of that chosen group of people, they will be thinking about, in their hearts, they will weep. God will have to dry the tears because they will be so brokenhearted at this statement that was made in AD 30. And then what happened in AD 70, and what happened in the middle 100s, and what happened in World War II, and what's continuing to happen in to their people to this day. They will weep knowing that the one they pierced was supposed to be their king, and he always was the Messiah, and he is now their king. But the centuries have passed, and it didn't have to be that way. But, okay, that's something to meditate on. You can take a break, and we'll come back, and we'll start part 3. Okay? All right.